I have an interesting relationship with the ukulele. As someone who is a big fan of the banjo-kazooie games as a kid, I remember being excited at the prospect of a spiritual successor, and to be honest, I actually had a decent time with the game, at least from what I played of it. But therein lies the issue. You see, the thing is, I have started playing ukulele on 3 separate occasions, and yet, I've never finished it. The furthest I ever got was to the 3rd world. This wasn't the game's fault necessarily. It was more so a case of me getting busy with life, forgetting about my playthrough, picking up the game again and needing to restart because it had been too long since the last time I played, you know the drill. So when Playtonic announced that they were remaking Yooka-Laylee, I figured that now would finally be the time for me to properly take on this game and beat it once and for all. However, many of you are probably aware that the original Yooka-Laylee was panned by fans when it came out, for a number of reasons. After the unbelievable success of the Kickstarter, people had high expectations, and the game, while serviceable, did not really live up to those expectations. It was haunted by some unfortunate flaws like empty feeling worlds, control issues, and a lack of overall polish. But here we are, 8 years and 1 impossible Lair later, with the Yooka-Replaylee in our hands. I want to give a special thank you to the folks over at Playtonic for providing me with a review key for this game and allowing me to experience it early. I spent some time playing through it, and I'm happy to say that yes, I actually finished it this time. But the question is, have Playtonic cleaned up their act and fixed what was wrong with the original? Let's find out. When Yooka-Replaylee was first announced, I remember thinking to myself, Yooka-Laylee isn't that old, right? Does it really need a remake already? In my head, the game still held up reasonably well visually, but man, looking at Replaylee side by side with the original, it's abundantly clear just how big of a visual makeover this game received. The worlds look absolutely gorgeous now, with a lot of fantastic texture work and subtle additions like blades of grass that rustle as you walk through them, and snow that crunches beneath your feet. One of my favourite levels aesthetically was always Glitterglaze Glacier, but the facelift it's received here has made it more beautiful than ever. It feels like a proper winter wonderland now, and the overall colour palette with the bluey-greeny hues is very pleasant to look at. Galleon Galaxy was another standout for me. I don't know what it is, but I just find the spacey looking water to be very pretty. Yooka and Laylee themselves have also had a bit of a glow up, with you now being able to see each and every scale on Yooka's body, and Laylee has this cool fur effect now too. The soundtrack from Grant Kirkhope has now also been fully orchestrated, and while I'm not really a music guy, wow, the tracks feel so grand now. The intro to the game has seen a complete rework, and I can confidently say that it's for the better. I always felt that Yooka-Laylee's intro cutscene was kinda jarring. You start off with Capital B and Dr. Quack talking about their plans to steal all the books in the world. It's very much tell don't show. And then Yooka and Laylee are kinda just chilling and have a book they found earlier stolen from them. You don't get a lot of context around the duo or the book, so to me it felt a little abrupt. In Yooka-Replaylee, the angle they go for is that it's a sort of retelling of the events of the original game, with Yooka and Laylee writing up the stories of their adventures in a book. You see them narrating the tales of how they came to live in a shipwreck, and you get to play through the sequence of them finding the one book, who is an actual character with lines of dialogue now. You free him from a cage, and then get to see the villains discussing their plans in a much more charming way, and after that, the book gets stolen. It flows much more naturally than before, and it gets you pretty invested from the outset, as you are able to A. familiarise yourself with the duo of Yooka and Laylee first, and B. you are introduced to the book and told of its value, so it getting stolen actually means something to you. The tutorial as well is a big upgrade, as it has you exploring a cave on the way to the Hivory Towers, where you learn how to use all of your moves in a seamless way. It doesn't feel shoehorned in or anything, and it works fantastically since this time, rather than having to pay Trouser for new moves, you start with them all unlocked. Something that I've been harping on about a lot recently is the importance of movement in a platformer, and while I may sound like a broken record at this point, it is true. Movement can truly make or break a 3D platformer. It sounds stupid, but if the character isn't fun to control, often the game simply isn't fun to play as a result. Now, I don't remember actively disliking the movement in Yooka-Laylee, but looking back now, boy did they cook with the changes they made to the moveset in Replaylee. These little alterations may seem minor individually, but when combined, they make a big difference. The way I'd describe it is that everything now feels much snappier. The animations for starting each move are noticeably quicker than they were before, which makes transitioning from one move to another almost instant. A prime example of how this makes a difference is with the roll. Whereas before, it was difficult to act out of a roll or string something into it, now that initiating a roll is near instant, you can seamlessly transition from rolling to jumping to gliding or vice versa. Also, rejoice, the roll isn't tied to the stamina meter now. The original game limiting your ability to use what was effectively the Talon Trot equivalent behind a meter was not ideal, but now you can roll around to your heart's content. Now I'm a big fan. It also feels like you have so much more control when you're rolling. I didn't realize this at the time, but your turning circle in Yooka-Laylee is pretty huge, so it takes a second to change direction, but in Replaylee, you can turn on a dime. There's also a new spin-dash-esque move, the Reptile Rush, where you can charge up and launch forward for a burst of speed. It's a very natural addition, I totally dig it. Even the Glide, it hasn't been drastically reworked or anything, functionally it's almost identical, but the animation has been changed in such a way that it makes the move feel better to use. It doesn't look like Laylee is struggling to hold Yooka up anymore, but man, just the way you can chain moves together so effortlessly, it's awesome, and it makes exploring the world, platforming, and completing challenges infinitely more fun. The worlds in Yooka-Laylee were absolutely massive, and while I do tend to be an enjoyer of sprawling platformer levels, I feel like this actually worked to the original game's detriment. The problem with the worlds being so big is that you felt that they were too big. In Yooka-Replaylee, however, the worlds are still the same size, but the difference is that they're much more densely packed. Rather than you wandering around looking for things to do, you find stuff to do at every turn simply by wandering around, and that's the way it should be. There are double the amount of pages than before, with each world having 50 of them as opposed to 25. That makes a big difference, as you're almost always stumbling across a new challenge or hidden pagey as you explore. The worlds are also fully expanded from the get-go now, and that, in combination with your moves all being unlocked from the beginning, means that you're able to clear each level as it comes, no backtracking required. I'm personally not someone who minds backtracking in general, but I can't deny that it was satisfying to be able to completely squeeze the juice out of each level before moving on to the next. As far as the pages themselves go, I do remember finding a few of them a little frustrating to collect in the original, but the ones I distinctly remember annoying me have either been reworked or just replaced entirely. Granted, I still did struggle with some of them, getting all the gems in the later minecart levels especially, but the challenge felt fair this time, and nothing ever felt cheap. Another notable change made to obtaining the pages can be seen with Rextro's arcade games, which have seen a complete revamp. Rather than the sort of half-baked minigames from before, which I was never too invested in, Rextro himself takes center stage now in his own isometric puzzle-style levels. These are awesome, and have you navigating through a series of obstacles while extending Rextro's neck to hit switches and grab gems. It's a beautifully simple concept, but the levels get more and more challenging as you go on, and each arcade machine has a total of 3 pages up for grabs. Alongside the pages, you've also got the quills from the first game, which have been put in generally more forgiving spots than before and are now colour-coded based on the world that they're in. As you start with all of your moves unlocked, rather than using quills to buy moves, you instead use them to buy things like health and stamina upgrades or tonics from Trouser. I kinda prefer this, as there's a nice incentive to try and find all of the quills in each world. Another thing that helps the worlds feel more jam-packed is an entirely new collectible, quids. These are a form of currency that you'll find dotted around all the different worlds, and you can hit these little piggy banks to make a bunch of them appear at once. They go a long way in making it generally feel like you're collecting more stuff, and because of what you do with them, they ended up being one of my favourite parts of this game. What I'm referring to here is the absolute facelift of Vendy. I don't mean her design, that's still kinda terrifying, but rather her function. She used to have a few tonics available which would have different effects on the game, like giving you more health or negating fall damage, but the range available in Replaylee is much more diverse. Some tonics are helpful, some are just plain goofy, like you can make all the enemies have googly eyes, which I kinda love. Some alter the visuals by applying different filters to the screen, while others add extra challenge. For example, making you die in one hit, or reintroducing fall damage to the game. A lot of these were brought over from the Impossible Lair, I believe, so it's nice to see them making the transition. Tonics aren't the only thing that Vendy sells you this time around though. She also sells you cosmetics, which might seem pretty trivial, but man, I love being able to absolutely drip out Yooka and Laylee in the sickest fits possible. There are a lot of cool options here, like again, googly eyes, which are kind of amazing, a whole pirate outfit, different themed skins for each world, and also the low poly Nintendo 64 style model, which naturally I adore. It's just good fun being able to mix and match outfits, and it's an addition that I really appreciated. The number of quality of life changes that they made as well is honestly staggering. For one, the levels finally have maps now. This makes it unbelievably easier to find your way around, orientate yourself, and actually remember where stuff is. You've also got the introduction of an entirely new character, Mark the Bookmark. You find this guy at various important landmarks of a level, and he acts as this game's fast travel mechanic. Having this guy here is a huge time saver and stops you from always having to trek back and forth between the different ends of the levels. Now, the map screen not only serves as a means of navigation, but also as a means of tracking your collectibles. Every pagey that you obtain is listed on here and displayed on the map, so rather than having an ambiguous display of how many pages you've collected out of the world's total, you can clearly see which ones you've already gotten and where you found them. You can also use any spare quids that you collect in exchange for revealing the location of a random pagey that you haven't collected yet, and let me tell you, the completionist in me was over the moon with this addition. Granted, I found the majority of the pages by simply exploring, but being able to know the locations of the last few that I was missing was an incredibly useful feature. I almost 100%ed the game, which is something I haven't done for a good long while. By the end of my playthrough, I had something like 295 out of the 300 available pages. I ought to go back and pick up the ones I missed at some point, although those were often the ones that were hidden behind the pagey pieces. Basically 4 quarters of a puzzle that, when combined, give you a pagey. You get them for completing smaller challenges, and I love them in concept, but as you can't track the individual pieces, they can be quite elusive at times. This was also the case for some of the quills. Finding the last few in each world was always a mission. It's also worth noting that the HUD looks a lot cleaner now. You've got a stamina wheel which pops up next to the duo when using an energy consuming move, which is easier to interpret quickly than having a stamina bar in the corner, and health is represented by a heart and a wheel rather than a series of butterflies. Again, it's cleaner, simpler, and far easier to tell how much health that you have at a glance. I think with the butterflies, they're trying to do something similar to the honeycombs in banjo-kazooie, which brings me on to my next point. Another issue that people had with Yooka-Laylee was how much it relied on nostalgia, to the point where it felt like it was using it as a crutch at times. Now though, while the game is certainly still reminiscent of those 3D platformers of days past, it has a much stronger sense of its own identity. There's a lot of random things I could point at here, subtle alterations, like the character dialogue boxes. The ones from the original game look like they were lifted straight out of banjo-kazooie, but Replaylee instead has this torn page look to its text boxes, which gives it more of a storybook feel. Something like this might seem inconsequential, but it feels more like the game is doing its own thing now. You've also got the Grunty's Furnace Fun-inspired quizzes being axed all together and replaced with cutscenes of Capital B and Dr. Quack getting progressively more and more frustrated with the progress of Yooka and Laylee. All of this adds a little bit more flair, a little bit more sauce, and speaking of sauce, there are a couple of extra animations here that I love too. Yooka and Laylee celebrate every time that they get a pagey, for example, which is accompanied by a triumphant sounding fanfare and some text. You've also got the cool superhero impact landings they do when entering a level, which when combined with the sound that plays, creates a powerful and satisfying feeling effect. As for the ending of the game, while I never got to that point in Yooka-Laylee back in the day, I watched some videos of the fight and I gotta say, the finale is a lot more climactic in Replaylee. I won't show you guys too much so as not to spoil it, but I was getting big DK64 vibes from the last phase of the battle in the best way possible. The ending cutscene showed off some interesting stuff as well, and I'm not sure if it's just Playtonic having fun, or if they're genuinely hinting at something here. I guess we'll find out in due course. So overall, when it comes to Yooka-Replaylee, as you can tell, boy was I impressed by it. They took a game that was a serviceable, albeit kinda mediocre 3D platformer and, well, addressed pretty much all of the criticisms people had towards it and made so many changes to make it something genuinely special and a game that I had a fantastic time with. This isn't some low effort, simple, surface level remaster, this is a full-on revamp. In a way, it feels like this is what Yooka-Laylee was always meant to be, and you can tell how much the team over at Playtonic has learned between the original game and now. So to answer the question in the thumbnail, yeah, they fixed it, and it's great. But to be honest, this feels like it's only the beginning. Playtonic have been very coy about what's to come for the Yooka-Laylee series, I feel, so perhaps Yooka-Replaylee was a means of testing the waters and setting things up for a fully fledged 3D platforming sequel. Regardless, it's nice to see this game finally getting the redemption it deserves, and I'm very excited for the future of this little duo.